Right now, the United States federal government is at a complete standstill. But listen, this isn't just another shutdown story you've heard before. This is a high-stakes showdown. It could either spark a healthcare crisis for millions of Americans, or it could fundamentally change the size of the government itself. So what is really going on here? Let's get into it. We are now 19 days in. To put that into perspective, that makes this the third longest government shutdown in modern American history. It's already blown past the 16-day standoff back in 2013, and while the politicians argue, essential services are grinding to a halt, and you've got hundreds of thousands of federal workers just sitting at home without a paycheck. So you have to ask the question, why does this keep happening? Seriously, how can the world's biggest economy just turn off the lights? The answer? Well, it's complicated, and it really shines a light on a deep, fundamental crack in American politics. So here's our game plan. We're going to look at why these shutdowns even happen in the first place. Then we'll dive into the core fight over healthcare and money. We'll unpack what makes this time so different, check out the impact on the economy, and then explore two ways this whole thing could end, which leads to the much bigger structural problem at play. Okay, first, let's cover the basics. In the U.S. system, Congress has to pass 12 different funding bills every single year just to keep the government's doors open. Now, if they can't agree, they usually kick the can down the road with a temporary fix. It's called a continuing resolution. But this time, nope, even that failed. And that's how you get a complete legislative deadlock. So here's a quick look at how we ended up in this mess. Back on September 19th, the House of Representatives, which is led by Republicans, passed a temporary funding bill. But when it got to the Senate, Democrats blocked it. And they didn't just block it once. As of October 16th, they'd blocked it 10 straight times. That refusal to pass the bill is what officially triggered the shutdown on October 1st. So why all the drama? Why such intense opposition? Well, the entire fight, and I mean all of it, boils down to one single critical issue: healthcare subsidies under what's known as the Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare. This isn't just a squabble over the budget. It's a massive battle for the future of American healthcare. And the stakes here are just incredibly high. Right now, there are 24 million Americans who depend on these subsidies to be able to afford their health insurance. These were expanded during the pandemic, but they're set to expire at the end of the year unless Congress does something. And just look at the financial hit. It's staggering. According to KFF, if these subsidies just disappear, the average person's annual insurance payment is going to jump from about $900 to over $1,900. Yeah, that's more than double. That's a cost a lot of families just plain can't handle. So this is the ideological clash at the center of it all. On one side, Democrats are saying, look, we have to extend these subsidies before open enrollment starts on November 1st, or we're looking at a huge healthcare crisis. On the other side, Republicans are pushing back, saying, whoa, hold on. This was a temporary COVID fix. Making it permanent would cost around $400 billion over 10 years, and the country can't afford that. But here's where it gets really interesting. While the politicians in Washington are totally deadlocked, the American public, they pretty much agree. A poll from KFF found that a whopping 78% of Americans, and get this, that includes a majority of Republican voters, actually support extending these subsidies. It's a massive disconnect between what the people want and what their representatives are doing. And that brings us to what makes this shutdown so fundamentally different from the ones we've seen in the past. See, it's not just about sending people home for a little while anymore. The administration is actually using this moment to make permanent cuts. They're trying to reshape the government itself. The key phrase you need to know here is reduction in force, or RIF for short. Now, this is not the same as a temporary furlough, where employees eventually come back to work and get paid for the time they missed. Oh no, a RIF is a formal legal process for permanent, targeted layoffs. It's not a pause button, it's a delete button. And look, this isn't just speculation. We heard it straight from President Trump himself in a recent interview. He made his intentions crystal clear. He said the shutdown gave him the authority to cut programs he sees as wasteful, and he declared, quote, "We're cutting them permanently." This completely changes the game. A shutdown is no longer just a budget fight. It's a tool for massive structural change. The scale of this is just immense. Right now, you've got 900,000 federal employees on unpaid leave. But the administration has been very clear that for over 10,000 of them, this isn't temporary. Their jobs are being targeted for permanent elimination through this reduction in force process. So, what in the world does all of this political chaos mean for the wider economy, for the markets, for all of us?
Well, maybe the biggest danger right now is that the shutdown has thrown economists and policymakers into a state of total uncertainty. They're essentially flying blind.
And here's why. The government agencies that give us all the critical economic data, like the Bureau of Labor Statistics that tells us about jobs, they're closed. They're shut down. That means key reports like the monthly jobs report that everyone watches, they're just not coming out. The flow of information has been completely cut off. As Nathan Sheets, the chief economist at Citigroup, put it, figuring out the economy is already a tough job. But when you suddenly lose access to the data, he says the challenge is magnified substantially. And this is a huge problem for an institution like the Federal Reserve, which has to make massive decisions about interest rates without the basic information it needs. And you can already see the consequences popping up all over the country. National parks are shut. Airports are reporting shortages of air traffic controllers. 7 million women and children are at risk of losing their nutritional support. And maybe the most alarming of all, 80% of the National Security Agency staff is at home, which raises some pretty serious questions about national security. So where do we go from here? How does this end? Broadly speaking, it seems like there are two competing ideas for how this crisis gets resolved. One is optimistic, hoping for a compromise soon. The other is deeply pessimistic, and it points to a long-term breakdown of the whole system. So the optimistic view goes something like this. As we get closer to the Thanksgiving holiday, public pressure is just going to become too much to ignore, and it'll force both sides to cut some kind of temporary deal. The pessimistic view, though, argues this isn't just a one-time crisis. It's a symptom of a political system that is, at its core, fundamentally broken. Let's actually explore that pessimistic scenario for a second, because it suggests that even if this particular shutdown ends, the real problem isn't going anywhere. This viewpoint basically says that the American system of government itself is now stuck in a state of constant, reoccurring crisis. And there are three core structural reasons that make these shutdowns a uniquely American problem. First, there's a Senate rule called the filibuster, which gives the minority party a massive amount of power to just block things. Second, the budget process is incredibly complicated, requiring 12 separate bills to pass. And third, a law from 1974 actually weakened the president's power over the budget, which, ironically, has led to even more conflict with Congress, not less. All of this really leads us to one final, very provocative question. This isn't just about one shutdown, one budget, or one president. It forces us all to ask, is the political machinery that was designed back in the 18th century now broken? Is the American system of governance itself now fundamentally dysfunctional? There are definitely no easy answers here, but it's a question we all probably need to be thinking about, especially as these crises seem to be becoming the new normal. Thank you so much for joining us to break it all down.